Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
We're recording, so go.
Okay. So let me just maybe introduce myself. I've been on your show before, and it's
like a
a pleasure
regular
to be back again, guys.
Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and I'm really happy to be here with John and Greg. Before we talk about John and Greg, let me talk a little bit about myself and the project we're involved and why we're all here today. And thank you again for letting us use your wonderful show as a forum to be able to discuss what we'll be discussing today.
Right.
So, as you know, as probably your audience knows, those who've heard me before, I'm a researcher. I live in Quebec City. I've been teaching for a number of years, but for over 10 years now, I've been doing an awful lot of research on the JFK assassination. It culminated in me being in the Oliver Stone documentary. I was really happy. I was talking about prior plots to assassinate JFK in that documentary. About last November, we launched a book called The JFK Assassination Chokeholds. And I bring this up because it's really interesting how this is completely different. I'm talking about the book Chokeholds is different from the research project. JFK Assassination Chokeholds was written by myself, Jim DiEugenio, who you've had on your show, and three attorneys who you've had and you will have had on your show. And I think it was a wonderful book. What we wanted to do is write the all-defining book on how you could prove to a jury that there was an assassination. And we called the areas of evidence that we looked into chokeholds. And we described 10 areas, right? Where, for instance, it's undeniable that Oswald was impersonated. I mean, we give 17 examples of that. I think it's undeniable that we think it's undeniable that Jack Ruby was on a mission when he eliminated Oswald so he wouldn't speak. So those are some of the chokeholds we discuss in that book. Now, why I say it's completely different from what we will be doing today is in chokeholds, we don't talk at all about what happened, right? We don't get into speculation or about motive or about who, what, where, when, and how. And whereas this research project that we're involved in, let me explain. Last year at the Lancer, a number of us got together. I'm talking about Jeff Meek, who's a very, I think, well-respected researcher and writer, and Dave Boylan, who I'm pretty sure John knows. He's an oftentimes collaborator with Larry Hancock, and he's known for his, his prowess in researching documentary evidence. So what we wanted to do is try and bring the discussion of the researchers and the experts like John, like Greg, and like Jim DiEugenio into, instead of proving there was a conspiracy, which to us is a given, I mean, it's okay. Now that we've done that, can we now see what the nature of the conspiracy is? And where does the research community agree? Where do they have differences? And so what we did is we had a list of over 600 names of people like you, everybody on this podcast, and people who write and people who go to conferences. And so we had a wonderful list of names, and we decided to do surveys. And we've completed 3 surveys so far. You can find these surveys, and this would be a good idea for your audience, Sean, is if you go on JFK assassinations.com, sorry,
Right.
JFKchokeholes.com, JFKchokeholes.com, and you go in the media section,
Right.
you will see the last 3 surveys, the 3 surveys that we've conducted. And you'll be able to follow, and you'll be able to also review those surveys.
And we'll add the link. We'll add the link to this.
Well, that's great. So if you go there, that would be a good idea. And I'll show some of the results today. And the questions, like the first 3 surveys, we're going to discuss the first 2 with our guests. The first one was on why was JFK assassination? What was the motive? The second area that we wanted to look at is what is the timeline? When did people decide that he had to go? When did they begin planning the execution? And when did attempts actually start? So, those are pretty. Now, out of the 600 recipients of that email, we've had response rates. The lowest is 112 people responded. And then we have 146 responses on another and 148 on another. So that is, I think, really interesting samples of where the community is at. So the first part, now we're going to have one more survey, we think, just one more. And that's where we go and get, the feeling of the community. But then what we do is we go into more depth. And the way we go into more depth is we decide to take experts like John, Greg. We had Jim DiEugenio on another show with Larry Hancock. We're going to have Jefferson Morley on a show, and Johnny Kearns. And, so we have about 4 podcasts of excellent quality like yours, where we sit down and we have a discussion so that we can go a little bit more in depth on what the experts think and see where that leads us. And the third element of research that we're going to be doing is documentary research. So when we talk about motive, we're going to try and, get people like Dave Boylan, we're going to try and find, what it is the perpetrators of the crime were feeling. Some of it is documented. So, so that's the idea of the project. And, before we get into it, Sean, maybe you want to introduce our next 2 guests and go from there.
Yeah, it's amazing to have John Newman and Greg Burnham on. Thank you guys for coming on. And if you guys just want to talk a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to our listeners. John, if you want to go.
Kind of breaking up there.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit there.
Yeah, Sean. But I think, John, if you want to kind of go first and just introduce yourself.
All right. Oh gosh. I'm 73 years old. And I'm trying to hang on for at least I need to get to about 88 to finish the books. So, I got into the JFK stuff backwards. It was a dissertation that began when I was with my boss, General Odom, head of NSA, and I was carrying his bags with him. We went down to some place in the Carolinas where he was going to do something. Anyway, on the way home, he put down his New York Times and asked me what I was going to do my dissertation on, and I said Mao Zedong, because I had done that as my master's. And he said, come on, you can do better than that. Why don't you get out of your safety zone and do something, harder than that? Then there is a thing in academia where we were supposed to overturn orthodoxy or, brand new evidence and so on. So when I got home, I called my mentor, Dick Thornton at George Washington. I said I was going to change dissertation topic. He said, "To what?" And I said, "JFK in Vietnam." And he said, "I never thought you'd ask." Night when after I got home, that was, and the rest of it, you know a lot about it already. Oliver Stone found out I was working on JFK in Vietnam and called me. And so I did scenes in there, and then from there went to other books on the Kennedy case. And I don't want to take up any more time. I've written about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them, and I'm still going. So I consider myself not just a JFK researcher, but the whole Cold War and a lot of what was happening in the 20th century, which people now, all my students have been born in the 21st century. They have no idea of anything that happened.
Right. It's like ancient history to them.
That's unbelievable.
Know anything, because academics don't have access, or they don't use the documents. They don't. They just interview people.
Right.
Anyway, I got a lot of documents over the years, and I think that it is time to get this stuff out, and so that's what I've committed myself to.
If I can just chime in, guys, I had the pleasure of reviewing. I've read a number of John's books and find them so rich in detail. And I had the pleasure of doing a book review on his most recent book, Uncovering Popov's Mole. And he and I spent quite a bit of time on the phone. Like, I was trying to grasp the details and the facts, and you know, we're lucky to have someone who understands that world and you know, was close to that world, in that world, who can, you know, guide us and ask the right questions and look at the right things. That's what I found to be fantastic in my exchanges with John. So
Can I add one thing to what you said? The most important thing of all is to admit when you're wrong and say so. That's very important, because the more you look at things, the more you're going to find. And nothing was made that was good in the world, whether it's astrophysics or whatever, that didn't go time and time again, having to redo things and find out, okay, get rid of this, that's wrong, and say so to people. It's a good thing, because you're one bit closer to where you want to be when you find your mistakes.
Right. All right, Greg, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, let's see. Since John started with age, I'll be 67 this year. I was born here in San Diego. So my first interest in the Kennedy assassination started at an extremely young age. I was born in San Diego, but my dad was still back on the East Coast, I guess at that time in Maryland. But my mom and my sisters and I lived out here. But then, you know, we were getting rejoined back there. My mom loved the West Coast. My dad had a lot of work to do back there. So we moved back to the East Coast when I was very young, maybe 2 years old, like in 59, maybe 60. And so I was 6 years old in first grade when JFK was assassinated. And so my interest started almost in the moment. And it started on a very visceral level. It wasn't an intellectual level at all. It was a child's gut punch. And to this day, I can't talk about this without getting emotional. I apologize. I didn't anticipate it. Occasionally this will happen when I've done presentations, you know, so it's mostly because when I revisit that moment, it's hard still.
Right.
My family was very aware politically, very aware of the Kennedy family. My mother was a JFK Democrat all the way, and she wept. And I had seen my mother tear up before. I'd never seen her weep. And my eldest sister was 13 years older than me. She wept. And so that, for me, for whatever reasons, my association to this started there with an emotional hook that I couldn't kind of get rid of. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't aware of the hook. I wasn't aware of the impact it would have, how long it would last. It was just there somewhere. And it kind of just faded over the next weeks, months. Yeah, I don't remember, it was 60 years ago exactly how long it took, but it faded. It faded. The interest didn't fade. The memories of the weekend in Washington, D.C. that weekend, how bad it was, how gray it was, how somber it was, and distressing it was. So as a 6-year-old, never having experienced anything like that, I mean, it was the first funeral services I ever attended in my life.
Wow.
We walked around his casket in the rotunda. But eventually it faded down, and it got reignited when I was in school. And I started learning about this. Now, my mother, of course, had been very interested in the subject and was very vocal about it. And so it kept me kind of interested listening to the news, the old Walter Cronkite stuff, and back when news basically was news for the most part. And I didn't want to give the media a pass at all, even back then. But I eventually got very hooked on the idea that I'm being lied to. We're being lied to by people who know. They're not making accidental mistakes in their proclamations that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman. Almost any fool can debunk that in 10 minutes or less. It's easy. This isn't hard. It's easy. The government has worked extremely hard for 60 years to try to keep the cork in the bottle. They're failing. And we need to recognize that, I think as researchers, we need to, because if not, we lose our way. When we think that they're going to win and that they're winning, we'll tend to lose our way some. We have to stay the course. We have to remember, look, the truth will always prevail. It may take time, but the truth will prevail because it's reality. Things that aren't real cannot prevail. So eventually it will prevail. So anyway, as I got into high school, I went to a college prep school, and that was when I first got access to a lot of in-depth reading materials. I was in a Catholic seminary at the time, so we were subjected to, a very rigorous scholastic situation, to say the least. And we had an outstanding library. We had outstanding professors. And but it was the first time I got a hold of the Warren Commission report. And so that was a mess, even for an adult, a completely full-grown adult, by my estimation, who was, 40, 45-year-old attorney, you could read that and go, well, this is a freaking mess, So at 15 or 14 or 16, when I first was reading this thing, it was really a mess. But it certainly seemed like certain things were standing out badly that hadn't been done, that hadn't been asked, that hadn't been answered, that hadn't been investigated, that hadn't been looked at, that had been brushed under the rug. I mean, the list just goes on and on. I'm preaching to the choir here, I know. So, that was when I first concluded that that was a lie. And then in college, during the HSCA, that was, like I said many times before, barely even better, if you can even call it better, that's even a stretch. So that was where my first interest, that's where it first came. It came first just from the gut, and then it eventually migrated to the brain. And as I continued during college, I was involved in debates on the subject. It's a lot of interaction. That was back in the days, when you could disagree with people and have actual honest debates. And in the end, and as John was pointing out, which I think is extremely important, admitting when you're wrong is incredibly important. I'll take it even a step further. I think anytime a person comes up with their own, I don't like to use the word theory, especially in this context, but whatever, we'll use it theory, whether it's a scientific theory or whatever. But whenever you come up with your own theory, I think it's important to try to debunk yourself before you've even shared it with anybody else. Right. Because if you don't, I mean, for me, you know, to use a slightly crude analogy, but if you ever see me on the street and you notice that my fly is down, please tell me. You know, I'm not going to deny it and get angry. I'm going to look down and give it a check, right? Because so I want to know when I'm wrong, you know. And so one of the best ways to do that is try to debunk yourself, you know. And so during this process of debating and whatnot, it was a very good experience because we got to debate each other, debunk ourselves, and go back and forth. So let's skip forward. After reading dozens of books on the subject, doing lots of research, getting as much as I could. For years and years, as everybody knows, it was almost a waste of time to go to NARA to try to get anything from NARA. It was all blacked out or difficult, or they didn't know where it was. They had no idea what you were talking about. Eventually, I met up with Jack White, the photographic analyst, one of the people who had been on the House Select Committee on Assassination's photographic expert team or whatever, witness or whatever. Whom they kind of unfairly pigeonholed, which is kind of another subject, but we'll talk about that maybe. Anyway, so Jack and I were talking on the phone. This was about 1995. And we were talking about different, you know, aspects of the case, the photographic evidence, the Zapruder film, et cetera. And something between us struck a note, and he told me of a fellow named Rich De La Rosa that was about to launch a JFK forum. And so back in those days, the internet had just started, as everybody here knows. Everything was pretty much news groups, they used to call them, remember? We used to call it the nut house over there. And I didn't participate in any of those because it was just craziness, you know. I usually don't like to talk about third parties who aren't here to defend themselves because I don't think that's fair, you know. But I will make a slight exception. You know, rest his soul, you know, John McAdams had one kind of going
there, yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying this to besmirch him in any way. I'm just saying it was really a free for all, you know. It was just everybody was just smoking everybody ad hominem everywhere, you know. So so Jack told me I should contact Rich, you know, as Rich was getting ready to launch this. So I contacted Rich, and so Rich launched the thing, and I became a founding member along with with Jack. And about half a dozen or so other people. And we ran that from end of 1997, early 1998, until Rich died in about 2000. What was that? Sorry, it was about 12 years or so, roughly, though. But we had a very strict rule there that there was no ad hominem attacks, no personal attack. You're free to attack ideas, you know, theories, all that stuff, but no personal attacks. So it was the first forum of its type. And I think that's pretty much with undisputed, you know, and Rich did a tremendous job with that. But like I said, we did it for about 12 years. We're the people who had, we've had so many good researchers on there. I can't name them. I mean, it was just, and back then, I mean, if you guys can kind of rewind your brain a little bit and remember, today we take this so for granted, like, look what we're doing here on the internet, right? I mean, when the internet came out, we could all of a sudden share pictures. We could all of a sudden share scenarios. We could share documents. It was just a huge leap forward, you know?
Sure.
So that's where a lot of my time was spent for those 12 years was in helping Rich manage that and do my own research, et cetera, et cetera. And I was very good friends with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. I think probably most people here know. I actually developed a relationship with Jerry Patrick Hemming as well, that I will actually say was a friendly one. Now, it didn't start out that way. I started out calling him up, and of course he was upset that I even had his phone number, was able to get it, and basically accused him of the crime. And it was my way of shaking the tree really hard to see what would fall out. And so we started off with a very contentious relationship, but over hundreds of hours of talking, my views of him changed quite a bit. And on his involvement, what my initial speculation had been was completely wrong. But anyway, so I don't want to go too far down any of these paths, but that's kind of where my journey has been. My best friends in the JFK research assassination community are, you know, David Mantic. He and I spend time together several times a year on the phone all the time. John Costella, very close friend. We spend a lot of time working on stuff to this day. And a lot of other people too. So that's about it, I guess. I think I gave you kind of a thing, and I avoided the emotional thing pretty well. So.
Thanks.
Are you thinking about selling your house? Well, Bob Connors, a realtor at Christian Saunders Real Estate, says, I can't sell your house, but I sure as heck can market it and get it from sell to sold. Call Bob today for great marketing and to get a ton of eyeballs on your house. Are you in the market to buy a home? Not sure where to start? If it looks like something you shouldn't buy, Bob's gonna tell you that. Think you can't buy a house or have no idea where to start? Been there, done that. Bob will get you going in the right direction. You can reach Bob at 570-614-3624 or 570-335-9000. And you can find Bob on Facebook at Bob Connors-Realtor. Whether you call Bob or not, please remember, stay awesome, all you awesome humans, and be kind to each other. Bob Connors, the realest real estater. And thanks to Bob Connors and Christian Saunders Real Estate for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Case Quattro Winery, featuring over 20 flavors of wine, from dry red, dry white, and fruit for your sampling pleasure. Case Quattro Winery offers entertainment, parties, and private events. Now serving a full menu with a little something for everyone, including appetizers, salads, dinners, pizza, and desserts. Case Quattro has some of the best live entertainment in the area, with comedy and karaoke nights and live bands. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for all of our upcoming events. And if you mention the code OUTA, that's OUTTA, you get 15% off of your order. Located on Main Street in Peckville, Pennsylvania, call 570-382-3855 for more information. And we thank Case Quattro Winery for their support.
Thanks,
All right,
Greg.
thanks, Greg.
Sean, you want me to maybe get started on some of the survey topics? And
Yes, let's get right into it.
okay. And by the way, Bill and Sean, you know, the only reason it's a bit of a different format, but because I know how to access the answers, and I am not going to provide much input. I'm here to listen mostly, but it's a discussion. So we value, you know, your knowledge, and if you want to chime in and or ask a question or whatever, you know, feel free. It's that's how I would see it. It's your show, so, you know, so feel free to do what you want. Okay, guys. So look, I'm going to share screen now, and I'm going to go to the first survey, which was mostly on motive, entirely on motive, as a matter of fact. And what I'm going to do is, okay, does everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go through, there are a lot of questions, so it's best that I go through a number of answers that are related, and then we'll open it up to John and Greg and whoever wants to comment. As I said, this first survey had 146 responses, and look, just to give you an idea of how knowledgeable the respondents were, we asked the question, how many books have you read about JFK? 65% said more than 30.
Wow.
Okay, and then you had 25% that said between 10 and 30. So when you consider that 90% of the respondents read over 10 books, and almost 2/3 of those read, you know, over 30 books, we're talking to people who are giving, I think, can provide intelligence thought to the discussion topics. So we got right into it. We you know, we tried to measure various motives that could have come into play here, and the question we asked is, JFK was assassinated because. And what you see here, right, you have disagree, somewhat agree, mostly agree, strongly agree, or no opinion. You're going to see that many of the motives have mostly agree or strongly agree. So what you're going to see is there's more motive than goes around, motive to go around. Now, do you see what's written at the bottom? He did not provide the required support for the failed Bay Pigs invasion. Right. You read that? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we can see, right, out of the respondents, the yellow bar and the green bar get an awful lot of votes there. So that's an important reason that people brought up. Okay, he did not want to engage war in Vietnam. Very, very noted. He did not want to strike Russia with a nuclear attack. Okay, so it's not as high, but there are more people who seem to think that's a possibility than don't. Let's keep going. His economic policies didn't really, sway that many people, but it's not completely discarded. His social policies, then we get to his clampdown on the oil industry. Okay, not very popular, but there is some stuff there. Look what isn't. It's friction with the Eastern establishment. His foreign policies, now we're getting into strong numbers. Weak numbers here. Confrontation with Russia, confrontation with Castro. Very weak. Clampdown on the mafia. Some numbers. But if you get in, okay, his diplomatic overtures to Castro, okay. Now, if you want to get into something that's really strong, right? He threatened to curb the power of the CIA. That is maybe the most, and there's another one. He failed to invade Cuba isn't quite as strong, but it's quite strong. But if you look at the one that has more definites, like you have that one about the CIA, and another one that is extremely strong. So if you take the top two, is here, you can't read it, but it says he was seen as a national security threat. I would say that the last three here are the strongest ones that stand out in the survey. Okay, and then when we ask the question, which of the choices below stands out as the top motive? So we saw that there were many motives, right? So many different motives, but which one stood out as the top? You go to the 35.4%, he was seen as a threat to U.S. national security. Second is he threatened to curb the power of the CIA. So that goes hand in hand with the first series of answers I showed you. So why don't we take a moment here and maybe just discuss the motives we looked at, and what, because you can have a strong motive, but which is the motive that will bring you to a point where you say, hey, he must be removed, right? That's the whole question. So I'd like to hear from our guests on that. Maybe start with John, or you
Well, if you want me to. Okay, so as I was saying before we came on the air, I've done podcasts and Zoom presentations for years on my evolving views on something I call Armageddon. And so last November at Duquesne, I decided, because I kept delaying, I would go and start talking about it publicly. And so I would just say this. In that presentation, I identified almost 6 separate things that happened in the last 6 weeks of the president's life, all of which were part of what was connected to the assassination of President Kennedy, and getting away with it. It's not just killing him, but how you're going to kill the president of the United States, and there's not going to be an investigation. And I'll just give you one example, which is lowering Oswald's threat. It was a big part of it. And it was done in the CIA and the FBI in different ways. mostly the documents that came in that showed what a threat he was were only seen by a few people in the CIA. And in fact, about 4. And because we have their initials on it, and the stuff was hidden, taken out of this 201 file. It was said 201, but they had a line through it, and they put it over in a compartmented thing in which was the FPCC thing that was going on in a completely different division, and so what it looks like from that perspective, he has no motive. He's not dangerous. Now you have to understand that this guy's, when he goes down there is a 2-time communist defector, right? He's already been there once, and now he's doing it again. And what he's saying, you could not have a more threatening person to be over the motorcade than Lee Harvey Oswald. So it took some real interesting way of manipulating the data so nobody saw it in the CIA, just a few people. And certainly McCone wasn't told a lot of things. He lied to him on a few occasions with respect to this. And so what happens is the people in the CIA don't really know. Like the guy who's in charge of it, his name is Whitten. He's our case officer in Washington, and he has to answer the question, right? Because the guys in Mexico said, "Who is this guy? He's going to all these communist consulates. I've never heard of him before. Do you know anything about him?" And the answer was extraordinary. Our latest information is May 62. And this is October the 2nd, 1963. His whole life in between is gone. Well, of course it isn't. Hoover knew about it, and he was banging the front door of the CIA, but every time his stuff came through, it was deleted from where it was supposed to be. It was put someplace else. So it was being managed during those last 6 weeks. Now, so John Whitten wasn't lying. The files lied to him. Okay, that's how they did that. He didn't know. When we go to the CIA, it gets to be more interesting. A guy by the name of Giesling, from the very time that Oswald showed up, he's the one who was in charge of everything, who got to see what. And they put him on the espionage list, too sweet. And nobody could look at anything in that file or add anything to that file without Giesling's permission. All those 4 years. Now, Giesling has the same memo that comes from Mexico City. And what does he do with it? He knows what's going on. And he takes a big swallow before he does it, because he knows he's going to tell a great big lie. And he does. But what the lie isn't really direct as much as indirect, because he basically just cancels the flash on Oswald, turns off the red lights. And so now and that's even more important than the CIA, because the CIA is not the one who vets the parade route. It's the FBI. It's for one thing, it's a domestic thing, but it is. And so the people that were responsible for deciding whether somebody like Oswald should be on the parade route or not, he wasn't included.
John, just quickly, can you say when Oswald was removed from the watch list? And was it both the FBI's watch list and the CIA's watch list?
Yeah, well, they don't both have a watch list. That's probably not the best term. There's a security index for the FBI. In the CIA, only 4 people even knew anything was coming in at all, because they had to take it away. Now, it went into the director's office, but somehow McCone isn't talking about it. So the moment it comes in the front door, it goes over into the SAS, is called the Special Affairs Staff. It's the Cuban staff, and that's how that was done over there. It was much different in the FBI, which had the responsibility. See, the CIA didn't have the responsibility to take anybody off the parade route or let them stay on it.
Right.
Which is what happens and what you're supposed to do when the president's in a parade route, is to take a look at who's in a place where he shouldn't be. Well, Oswald's threat level was just completely decimated in the FBI and the CIA at the same time.
In October, right?
October,
Okay.
63. Both places. Now I have more. I said 6 things, but I don't want to monopolize the time here. Those are just 2 things that were parallel in those last 6 weeks.
So just for your audience, think of that, is that in October, this guy who had been in Russia, a defector threatening to give away secrets, seen as a traitor. He had already been in Mexico City trying to defect again or meet. He had been seen by the FBI in New Orleans, right, because of his Fair Play for Cuba committee leafleting, and questioned by the FBI. And this guy is removed simultaneously by the CIA and the FBI in October, so that he can be in the Texas School Book Depository on the 6th floor.
Sure.
Thank you, John. I think that is supremely interesting. Greg, do you want to weigh in on motive? Guys, I don't want to, it's so interesting, okay, but I just want to maybe, if we can keep the answers in the 5 to 6 minute area, just so we can go to the next subjects. But no problem so far. I think I'm in tune. So go ahead, Greg, if you have any comments you'd like to add.
Well, in regards to the poll, the first thing I'll say, I'm not surprised, and it shows a lot of progress, in my opinion, that again, truth isn't, determined by a show of hands. So I don't mean to imply that, but that serious researchers who are very knowledgeable have all gravitated around 3 specific, at least 3, there might be even 4, because I think you mentioned the Bay of Pigs in there, kind of ranked pretty high too, his failure. But they said his failure to support the air support. So I kind of want to break that down a little bit. So I think I would like to say that these all kind of fall under the national security threat umbrella. And so specifically, so let's start from the first crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm sorry, the Bay of Pigs crisis. So I think that no one was more surprised that Kennedy didn't choose to defend, for lack of a better word, the people on the beach that were being, trapped on the beach, than the intelligence community. I think they fully expected him to cave in at the last minute and go against what his policy had been. And his policy had been that there would be no direct U.S. intervention under any circumstance. We have the memos from that. We have the last minute correspondence back and forth from Nicaragua. We have correspondence from Colonel Jack Hawkins, who went down there, spoke the language, wrote back and said, hey, they all understand there's no U.S. intervention. So people probably in the agency conflated 2 different things. The first one was there was supposed to be an airstrike that was supposed to be a pre-dawn airstrike. That has been conflated with an invented one from apparently the USS Essex that would have taken place the next day, early in the morning, after it was too late. So they didn't approach JFK for the second or so it was too late to do the original airstrike because the dog had left the barn, or the horse had left the barn. But the second one had never been in the plan to begin with, and they didn't even inform him until it was way too late to really do anything significant with that. So I don't personally think, I have a lot of doubt in my mind that the Bay of Pigs has a lot to do with it. Now, I'll say that with a caveat. I think that the disinformation surrounding the truth about the Bay of Pigs was so thorough that there's a good reason that a lot of people do believe that it has a lot to do with it. So I don't fault people for having that impression. I would invite people to go to my website and look at my Bay of Pigs work, and just for their review. They may disagree, they may have information that differs from mine, they may completely come to a different conclusion. But I've done a lot of this on Black Op Radio. There's like a 4-hour segment on just the Bay of Pigs. So if anybody wants to hear the rest of that, because I don't want to take too much time on that one, okay? But I do think that that following the Bay of Pigs, a real important thing happened. JFK signed National Security Action Memorandums 55, 56, and 57, which basically told the CIA that okay, to break it down, let's put it this way. We've got two different types of war, right? We have conventional war or hot war, and we have Cold War, right? So Cold War involves clandestine activities. A great deal of it does. Kennedy was very frustrated by the CIA during the Bay of Pigs in that respect, in the Cold War type of activities. And so he basically defanged them with these National Security Action Memorandums and said he wanted the military, the Joint Chiefs, to report directly to him, unfiltered, to the CIA. Now, this is, of course, terrified Lemnitzer. This is not what he does. Lemnitzer is a war man, right? I mean, a good one. He knew what he was doing. So Operation Northwoods all of a sudden becomes a viable thing, right? It's like, right. So you ask the military, we want you to do secret stuff, and what do? Well, let's see. We'll do secret stuff. We'll pretend like Cuba sunk one of our ships, and then we have a hot war again, right? Which is what we know how to do. See, so right. So that's kind of a interesting take on that, right? So I think that the Bay of Pigs needs to be looked at harder, but I won't do it here. Okay. The second one I think that's real important. I mean, not just the Bay of Pigs, but also Kennedy's response to the CIA as a result of the failure at the Bay of Pigs, I think is real important to look at. And then the third one I'll say is the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think that Kennedy's response to that, again, was not what was expected, and especially in the Pentagon. I think that was where the growing fear that he was going to be weak on communism, weak around the world, weak in foreign policy in general, it kind of put the lid on it, right? Because it got so close to our border. And I think that so I think there's a confluence of interests here, but I think most of it revolved around the military intelligence complex, but heavily in the military. That's my opinion from what I've studied. So I hope that answers the question.
DK's Corner, located on 802 East Lackawanna Avenue in Oliphant, Pennsylvania. Visit DK's Corner for hot and cold sandwiches, soups, salads, pizza, and delicious breakfast, including breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and DK's Razzle Dazzle flavor shaken espressos. And take it from me, the best cheesesteaks around. Follow DK's Corner on Facebook and Instagram, or call them at 570-209-0278 to find out about their daily specials and catering. Check out DK's Corner, Oliphant's little hoagie shop. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. That's DK's Corner in Oliphant, Pennsylvania. And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy, and it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy, Tom's philosophy. It's great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness. Of
course. And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
Well, start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sean.
Hi, John.
Bill. Sean, Bill, I don't know if you want me to go on to the next one or what you.
Go on to the next one.
I think John wants to add something. Go ahead, John.
Okay.
So going back to the early phase, I spoke a minute ago, right in the last 6 weeks, something that's overlooked about the Bay of Pigs is that there was a larger operation that was in play before that thing started to get pushed forward. And that was Laos. And it was a huge operation. Now what happened is it's crazy, but so Kennedy said, no, I don't want to go to war in Laos. I would like to have, an agreement between both sides, between East and West on the Laos thing, put it away. And so what they did was tell him a lie. They said that the bad guys, which was Fumi's, the Pathet Lao, could be wiped out by the American guy, Fumi and his guys in one day. And so they would not be able to come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is what they were coming down, and into Laos and so on. And Kennedy said, well, that's good. I could go along with that. Because that's what was causing a lot of problem. And so what happens in the end is that Kennedy says, okay, let's do that. And this is a couple of weeks back, 3 weeks maybe, before the Bay of Pigs, okay? So, but what happens is, instead of our guys winning, they throw down their weapons and Pathet Lao get all the way down into Cambodia. And there's Kennedy for the first time. You see him on TV with a pointer.
Yes.
Laos, it is his first black eye. This is before the Bay of Pigs.
Yes.
And so then he changes his mind and says, okay, but I give the final okay. So they send 3 aircraft carrier groups down there. Okay, that's a lot of stuff, a ton of Marines there, and in Okinawa, ready. Lemnitzer is in there waiting for the invasion to happen. And it doesn't happen because Kennedy says, no, wait a minute. It looks to me like the Bay of Pigs thing is only a couple of days away. Let's see what happens there first. And so, of course, the rest there. So then he says, oh my God, with the papers in his hand, thank God for the Bay of Pigs. Or we'd be in Laos now, and that's 100 times worse.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's what he said. It's in JFK, Vietnam. It's just, that's what he said. And so there was a big operation, big operation, much bigger than would have taken place. But the real question.
Hey, John, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So was this operation in Laos planned mostly by the military, or is it a CIA operation?
No, it's mostly military.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. I wanted to double check with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's the type of thing that, and I agree with you about the Bay of Pigs, because you said that it's hard to conceive of it of itself to be the main motive, but it certainly starts motive. But when you look at the lousting on top of that, then you're seeing, you know, the Pentagon people got on the phone and talked to the SINCPAC chief, and he found out that they weren't going to do anything. And he said, well, okay, maybe we can put our guys in Vietnam. Let's wait and see. So, but yeah, that's I think the motive is on its way in early 61.
You know, I agree with that as well. Can I add one more thing before we move on? Because something John just said sparked this in my head. I think that one of the beginning planning or motivations roughly around the Bay of Pigs time, and the Laos information here that you just said is quite pertinent, I think. I just lost my train of thought after asking permission to say something.
Mine all the time.
It was right there, and whoop, there it went.
Oh, well.
You know what? You know what? I think I'll probably, because you got in a little bit into timeline and stuff, maybe a question that I may bring up will, you know, give you a flash.
We'll come back.
What's interesting here is what I holding on to is a couple of things, but the idea that many of these, whether it's Laos, whether it's the Bay Pigs, the missile crisis, Kennedy's way of handling things and his decisions were, you know, at the opposite end of the prism from what, you know, the people in charge of handling American national security thought. So, you know, the idea that it's under the umbrella of him being a threat of a national security is interesting. So, and by the way, you know, when you discuss it with other specialists, they kind of see it the way you guys are describing it, but you're giving different examples. So I find that very fun.
Well, one of the things, it came back to me when what John mentioned about he thought it started very early.
Yeah,
I agree with that 100%, very early. And when I first started researching all this, I didn't think that at all. But as I got deeper into it, it became apparent to me that it started very early. I think that they recognized early that a president with the audacity to buck them like that was not somebody that they could live with.
Well, Kim Eugenio, sorry, go ahead, Greg. I didn't want to.
I also think that the agency early on planted these seeds among the anti-Castro Cuban community that JFK had failed to supply the air support, because we know that's false today. We had documentation proving it. It's just false. That was not part of the plan. So that was inserted into it, I believe, in order to start another patsy, another false patsy. Yeah. Okay, when I say false patsy, you need more than one. You don't need just, you know, Lee Oswald wasn't the only patsy in this. That's another thing I think we all need to remember, right? That we have several. The mafia is a patsy in this, right? The Bay of Pigs, I mean the anti-Castro Cubans, right, are another one. So once you realize, or you know, if you review my stuff, you might disagree with this, but if a person realizes or come to the conclusion that the anti-Castro Cubans literally had no motive to hate JFK over the Bay of Pigs, because they knew going in that this airstrike wasn't even planned. You see, now I'm not sure that that you can make a case that well, first of all, the anti-Castro Cubans couldn't control the autopsy, they couldn't control the parade route. There's so much that they couldn't have controlled, right? But they sure could make a good patsy, because you can really paint them with a great motive for hating JFK. Which is sort of a backfire, to be honest with you, in logic when you think about it. Because if a person, especially somebody in the government, you know, that is into black ops, is going to hire an assassin or assassins, the last thing you want is them to hate the target. You don't want emotion. You don't want snipers with emotions. You want snipers that are shooting at paper targets. You want snipers that have no feeling. Adrenaline, next to lateral motion, adrenaline is a sniper's worst enemy. And so you don't want people who want Kennedy dead pulling the trigger. You want people who are being paid to do a job who don't give a shit who the guy is.
Well, Greg, thank you, because that's a good
Wow.
lead into the next question. Except, does somebody want to say something more?
I just
or-
have some, if I could throw in here, Professor.
Sure, go ahead.
John and Greg. So, as having said all that you said right there, then how do you feel about the Kennedy's, not escalating the war in Vietnam? Where does that fit into the motive? Is that kind of the last straw, like NSAM 263?
Yeah. Can I answer that question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So it's a series of things, and you're where I was towards the end of the show, but we got a lot more going on. In 61, you got Berlin, and
Yeah.
the Joint Chiefs put together a secret PSYOP. Now that stands for Single Integrated Operational Plan for Nuclear Warfare. And usually it's used to brief the president for what's going to happen the next next year, calendar year. And that's not what happened in the summer of 1961, because what happens there is they brief Kennedy on something about 1963, which is weird.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, the fall of 63. But at the same time, this Khrushchev thought that Kennedy was going to be a good guy and a good partner to work with. But when he saw what happened in the Bay of Pigs, he said he's weak. And so he turned around 100% and went after Berlin. And we watch it all summer long, all the way up. And so while Kennedy is knocking heads with people over Vietnam at that time, that whole thing comes to a head. And Kennedy decides, because they use this PSYOP just at the checkpoint Charlie's, everybody's facing each other with their turrets, facing each other and all that.
Yep.
They drop this thing, they drop a turd in Kennedy's punch bowl to force him. Well, he was waiting for that. He was waiting for that. He had some help from a couple other people that were helping him out. So he had a bigger turd to drop in their punch bowl. And what he did was he sent his number 3 guy in the Pentagon out to tell everybody in the world everything we had on nuclear weapons. It was unbelievable. And Khrushchev had to sue for peace instantly. And Kennedy said, okay, listen, here's the deal. I'll go easy on Berlin. You pull your tanks back first. And 20 minutes later, I'll do mine. And they did. That thing almost went hot. Okay. So that's the next thing. And so when we get to the Cuban Missile Crisis, the same thing happens. All these people underneath of the political hierarchies, that includes Khrushchev on the other side, they want war.
Yep.
And when it starts getting hotter and hotter and hotter, neither Khrushchev nor Kennedy wanted to do it. So how could they make a deal? Because they made a deal over Berlin, right? And Kennedy did do what he promised. It's worse in the Cuban Missile Crisis because Khrushchev was demanding that he get rid of all the missiles in Turkey. And, and in Italy had even more.
Yeah.
But so that is really where you see that Khrushchev is willing to wait. Kennedy says, "I'll do it, but I can't do it now because if I do it now, they'll get me out of office or something." And so Khrushchev said, "Fine," and he did remove those missiles. So that's the reason why we didn't have a big war in the Cuban Missile Crisis, is because those two guys got together.
Absolutely.
Now the problem is what happens in 63. Because they gave him 3 times, they gave Kennedy a chance to do what they were talking about. And by the time we get into the fall of 63, what they get is NSAM 263 instead. And so that's it. The 4th Armageddon try was actually to kill Kennedy, to get him out of the way so they could do what they wanted to do. But like I said before, we were talking before this, it didn't happen because Lyndon Johnson wasn't ready for it yet. And then he waited a little bit, and then there was too much equality in terms of strategic weapons at that point. So Armageddon never happened, thank God. But it's kind of a weird story how it just escalated. The motive got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the last minute, Johnson, for his own ego reasons, decides, and now we got to wait till I'm elected in my own right, and then it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, you know, that's the way I would summarize it as this thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
It goes boop in the end because Johnson doesn't want to do it right away.
Awesome.
I if I could add something, or
Sure. Yeah.
I always find it fascinating that when Kennedy issued 263, NSAM 263, it was ostensibly in response to a report, the McNamara-Taylor report,
Right.
that was written ostensibly, allegedly, by McNamara and Taylor while they were on their fact-finding mission in Vietnam. But it turns out that Kennedy, I'm using this word loosely, basically dictated the contents, at least the talking points of it,
Right.
to Mendenhall. I'm sorry, he sent
Krulak, right?
He sent Krulak and Mendenhall to Vietnam in September of '63 on a fact-finding mission. This is before he had sent McNamara and Taylor. And Krulak and Mendenhall came back, and Mendenhall and Krulak had two opposite opinions about the conditions in Vietnam. Mendenhall basically said that it was going, you know, very badly, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and was more of a warmonger from the State Department. He was a foreign service officer. And Krulak's take on it was almost opposite, to the point where JFK said, you know, to the two of them, did you guys visit the same country when they came back, you know? So we know today that JFK basically didn't go with the Mendenhall's recommendation, and he went with Krulak's. And then he sent Taylor and McNamara to Vietnam. And while they were gone, he had Krulak, like we were just saying, he gave him basically the talking point was, we're getting out of Vietnam. That's it. Now write the report for these guys and give reason for it. Give, you know, all this evaluation, you know, and he wants it to look real. So there's got to be like there was a debate and this and all this stuff, right? So when it comes back, when you notice the wording of NSAM 263, it says it relies on the McNamara-Taylor report, but it says the only part of it that was approved was the part in section at XYZ here. Well, now that's not even in NSAM 263. You have to go to find what the McNamara-Taylor report, that section is. And what is it in that section? Get out of Vietnam. We're getting out. We're getting out by the end of '65. We're pulling out 1,000 by December, and we're taking out the majority of personnel. Actually, according to John Judd's mother, who did the call-up for the Kennedy administration, a great number was supposed to be coming out actually in '64 as well, but all of it by the end of '65. So I think that's another area of what we could maybe throw into this umbrella of a national security threat to the establishment. In other words, to the intelligence establishment and the military intelligence establishment, that here is somebody who was willing. See, Kennedy knew he's coming into an election year, right? He has got to not be looked at as soft on communism after everything that's already gone on between the Bay of Pigs, you know, the stuff everybody knew about. Most people didn't know anything about Laos, but the Bay of Pigs was right out in the open, right? And we know the Cuban Missile Crisis is way out in the open. So he doesn't want to be accused of being soft on communism and lose as a result of this. So he's trying to stand strong. So the best way he figures to do this is if the top people in the military actually recommend to him that we can withdraw. So McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, and Taylor, the Joint Chief Staff Chairman, right? So he puts their name on Krulak's report, and they fly it to Honolulu. I guess Prouty is the one who sent somebody to Honolulu with the report that was all leather bound and gave it to McNamara and Taylor and said, this is your report that you're supposed to give to the president when you get back, which they did. Now, this is not the kind of thing that goes well in the upper brass of the military. This is like nuking yourself as president. This is like lighting the fuse to your own atomic bomb almost. Do you know what I'm saying? That you're sitting on, you know? I'm not saying that it was the wrong thing to do. I'm saying that the idea of doing an end around his Joint Chiefs of Staff and around his Secretary of State is not very wise. Does he have the authority to do it as Commander-in-Chief? He absolutely does. He's the President of the United States. He has, right? And his policy was, we're getting out of Vietnam, and that is our policy. Now, how do I get it implemented? Because I'm not going to get any cooperation on this without, and then I might not get reelected and be able to actually execute this plan. So the
Right.
way around it was to pin the recommendation on the top brass. You see, well, this must talk about turd in a punch bowl, John. This sounds like a pretty big one to me, you know.